See, I think, I mean, one way to start, what comes to me here is that St. John of the Cross somewhere says, he's talking about being kind of like radicalized in this oneness. There's this mystic poet. And uh, he says, send me no more messengers. I can't take any more. Because everything I hear about God deepens the ache in my heart for a presence that has no name. You know what I mean? They fall so, anything that could even be said falls infinitely short, of what's claimed me. See? And therefore one's solitude is that one becomes less and less able to explain to anybody, including ourselves, what's happening to us. And yet what's happening to us in some sense is that we're being translated into God. That is, God's come for us. And so the solitude of God, where Plotinus never less alone than when alone, and that God alone is God, and you alone are you. So never less alone than when alone, so alone with the alone. And it all becomes, so any words start becoming a kind of intrusion into some unattainable, unmanageable thing. And by the way, then the very fact you can't manage it doesn't stop it from coming for you. In other words, that your inability to manage it itself has to be surrendered over to the love that's making everything unmanageable. And it's a kind of a sweet death, like everything's becoming unbearably tender or unbearably unraveling in some unspeakable way that you can't put words to. So then when he speaks, he speaks out of that. I mean, I think the power, this is like Martin Heidegger, the vocation of the poet is to evoke the holy. And this is what makes music so a kinship with this, because music carries the cadences, that conveys this unexplainable thing. So you can feel it in your heart, as it's resonating. But what you're resting in is the very unsayable thing, that you long for. It's kind of like that. So I think the beauty of Merton's words as a teacher is that everything he says counts, because everything he says is this. Everything he says is a kind of like a cadence or kind of an expression of this one thing, endless variations of this one thing. It's just the under continuity of everything that he says. I mean, he never breaks his stride in a way. Kind of very mysterious, actually.
It reminds me of Meister Eckhart's "God Rid Me of God."
Yeah.
Like the starting point. If the starting point of your words is rooted in God rid me of God.
Yeah.
Like
right.
in the sense of the God that separates me from God because it's my idea of God, or
yeah.
Right.
Yeah. See, again, I think it's someone who's loved someone very much for a long, long time, and the beloved dies, and the person's at the liturgy, and they're listening to the eulogies and people coming up and talking, and every kind thing the person says, you appreciate their sincerity. When they come up and say, "You have my condolences," and all that, but you're so aware that the essence of the matter is something so utterly beyond what any of them or you could say, and you've been unraveled by it, and like you're bereft, in some graced way. And so I guess, so just like that can happen between two people, it's a sacrament of this. God's the infinity of that. See? And therefore I desire that. See, this is my homeland. This unsayable oneness with each other. That's your destiny for me. This is why you created me, really, for this. It's it's very profound, really. Yeah.
And you read that when you were in high school, that text.
Yeah.
Right? How old were you? Junior high, middle?
I was 14. I was in the ninth grade. And all this abuse was going on at home. And I was in an all-boys Catholic school in Akron, Ohio, Archbishop Hoban High School. And I was going there because I thought I wanted to be a priest. I thought I was going to be a diocesan priest. But because of the trauma, I couldn't pass any of my courses so I couldn't pass Latin or algebra or anything. And 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 so one of the people in ninth grade religion class talked about monasteries. And even though I was raised Catholic, I'd never heard of monasteries before. And talked about Thomas Merton. So I went up right after school, and they had the Sign of Jonas, this diary that he kept as a monk. And on the very first page, he has those words, and desire to be, I would the desire for solid to be lost in the secret of your face. And I can remember standing there, realize, at 14, I don't know what this means, but something in me does. And like me too, like me too. I want this, and this started the whole thing. I kept reading him, and I remember I had a chance to go back to Akron about 10 years ago, and I went to Hoban High School, and I went over and stood in the library, the very place I stood when I opened that book 50 years earlier. It was like holy ground, like you could have a little plaque there. This is where Jim Finley got zapped. As a traumatized 14-year-old. You never know.
You never know.
You never know. That's really true in hindsight. You look back, you just never know. In an unexpected turning of something, how that all that will unforeseeably wash out for you. Once you know that all life is like that, that's a very humbling and beautiful way to look at our life, really.
Yeah, to hold it so openly, and yet, like, it makes me think of Merton's work itself, and how he's, sometimes struggled with how he thought maybe he showed up for it too much. But that if he hadn't shown up for it, that book wouldn't have been in the library, and
exactly,
it would have been this sort of erased moment in time. Anyway, it's I think about showing up for the work myself with a open hands and an open spirit, and not to own it or but to show up for it, because you never know, right?
That's right. That's exactly. Yeah, and then God's the infinity of the unforeseeability of all these things.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, it's unfolding, and so even this thing here that we're working on here together, and this talk we're having, neither you nor I can know, the ripple effect in people that it touches, in which they're going to unforeseeably be asked to pass on, or that's how we're always passing on what was given to us. We act out of a response to something, and then that response is the work, and then the work overflows our own understanding of its implications. And so anyone who's a parent, or anyone who's a teacher, or anyone who just life, just to see things this way. And I think for Merton, then this is living a contemplative way of life in the midst of the world. See, this is where we're out in the midst of, but we can live in the world as someone who's sensitized to things like this, and live in fidelity to them. And that's really, I think we have to grow where we're planted and do this.
And to somehow find a way not to take it too seriously all at the same time. Or be possessive, or
I once was a monk at Gethsemane. His name was Brother Dominic, and I went there when I was 18, and he was in his 80s, I think, when I went there. And every year on the Feast of St. Dominic, he'd have the abbot announce to the community that it was his feast day. And he had 2 canes. And so he would stand real shakily, and he'd bow to the community, and the community would bow back. So I once asked Merton, what do you think of Brother Dominic? He said, well, Brother Dominic's a holy old man. He said, but Brother Dominic makes something out of the fact he's here so long. He said, the moment you make anything out of anything, you're dead. And so the ego's always trying to construct a story about its own transformation. I'll publish later my memoir, my spiritual memoir, a page turner. And then we catch ourselves doing that. We're just human beings. Thomas Merton once said, all this is as serious as death, and so without a sense of humor, you won't make it. And so you can laugh at the foolishness of yourself, because you're trying to get your footing. To some degree, we all need to do that. We should all have reflective knowledge of our own unfolding story. But when it becomes an ideology, like we have a fundamentalistic sense of who we are, then God, we get in our own way. So the ability to laugh at it, and really, this, if you want to make God laugh, tell her your plans for the day. just when you think you've constructed this answer. Martin says we should all get down on our knees right now and thank God we can't live the way we want to. God doesn't let us get away with it, and it's really true. This whole attempt to get it together keeps getting broken open, and that's what saves our life, really.
Mm-hmm.